Hi friends, it's me again, Beth. Welcome back for the second episode of Tour Salem with a Local. And you know, the response to the first episode was entirely overwhelming. I got 2 people who couldn't wait for the next episode. 2! The pressure was mounting. But despite COVID-19, here I am out here all by myself, Easter Sunday, showing you again that from one spot in Salem you can see layers and layers of history. So I'm here behind the Peabody Essex Museum. I'm going to quickly pan through and show you some of the buildings that we'll be talking about. From this one spot we can see the John Ward House. We can see Howard Street, location of Howard Street Cemetery, possibly where Giles Corey was tortured to death. We can see this recently renovated house that I'll talk about. We can see the summer house here. We can see behind it the most expensive house in America at the time it was built that I talked about last week. We can see the Hawthorne Hotel and that secret room I referred to. We can see the back end of the Gardner Pingree house along with its carriage house. We can see a replica Quaker meeting house. We can see a little merchant shop, a 10 by 10, probably from a shoemaker, and a bunch of other things. So you'd be surprised, standing in one spot, how much history you can see. Let's check it out. This is a replica of a Mormon worship house. The original first Mormon house would have been built in Salem in the late 1600s, but this replica here would have been built in the mid to late 1800s. But in its own way, it's still historic. It's one of the first replica meeting houses built, and I believe it still has some of the original timber from the first meeting house. This little building back here is what's called a 10-footer or a 10 by 10. I think you can guess why. And this was probably almost like a little retail space. Probably a person who either made and or repaired shoes would have worked in this little 10-footer. Here we have the most recognizable house in this little alley over here. It's called the John Ward House. It is, I believe, one of the first private homes ever opened as a public museum in America. It was built somewhere in the 1680s. And it is what they call a first period house, which is distinguished by this dark wood, the overhangs, a single chimney in the center, built very fat to make sure that all these fireplaces in the center of the building were able to funnel their heat and ashes out without setting the roof on fire. These little leaded glass windows, and this very dark color, which probably was not painted black, maybe more of a dark stained wood. This building is a replica of what it would be like to live back in the 17th century. You can tour it as part of a Peabody Essex Museum and Mission Pass. Well worth it if you're in town, or even if you're local, check it out. I highly recommend it. From this street angle, you can see this lean-to addition from the side of the John Ward House. Probably would have been the kitchen area that would be part of the home later. In the early years, the kitchen space, it would have been separate just to keep that intense heat of the cooking area away from the interior of your home. These buildings just across the street from the John Ward House are a really good example of that architectural style that is so familiar to Salem, where the 2 floors are symmetrical on the first and second floor. Then you have that little short top floor. This is an extreme example of that architectural style. That top floor mostly likely used for servants and children, but you still get this idea of this big stately 3-story home. Just across the street over here we have the Howard Street Cemetery at the end of the street. Howard Street Cemetery, thought likely, possibly, where the torture of Giles Corey occurred during the witch trials of 1692. But with so much to talk about in Salem that has to do with our history of the witch hysteria and the trials of 1692, it's kind of a nice break to talk about everything but the witch trials here and there, because Salem, were not for that, would be known as really just a beautiful city with much early wealth and a great history in our country of being one of the first cities settled in America. And look at that sunset, just beautiful. So here we have the Daniel Bray house from 1766 that recently underwent some remodeling. So they came up with this color scheme from actually stripping the paint down to the base layer, which they believe likely was this brown orange color. Not done in reminiscent of Halloween, but done based on what they believe the actual original color was. And what's interesting about this house that you'll see on the side here, like a lot of houses in Salem, is you'll see this little back addition, this little pop-up. So I like to call Salem the city of puzzle houses, because our houses that were built very early were built before rooms such as the kitchen and the bathroom were actually part of your house. So as progress came, as we're able to live more comfortably, the houses would have to be remodeled to fit those rooms in, because hello, if you could have a kitchen and a bathroom indoors, wouldn't you add on to your house too? And this standalone building here is called the Derby BB Summer House, and that's exactly what it would have been, a little summer house. But of course it wouldn't have been in the spot. It probably would have been on a sprawling front lawn, but certainly a sprawling front lawn that belonged to someone, like people that would have lived in a huge mansion like this. It would be a place in the afternoon, maybe you'd have some tea, some cookies, and just generally chill because you are straight out from your super filthy rich life. Who doesn't need a break from that? This, I believe, is one of two that still remain, designed by Samuel McIntyre. The other one is in Danvers, Mass. So two buildings that you can see from this spot that I mentioned in my first video, where I just stood on the Salem Common and talked about all the great layers of history that you can see from there. One is this very beautiful home, which at the time was the most expensive home ever built in America, and that is called the Andrew Safford House. It was built in the early 1800s. You can see on this side the beautiful columns. And also from this angle, above this carriage house that belongs to the Garden of Pingree house, we can see the Hawthorne Hotel, and we can see that tiny little room on the top next to the flag. That is the secret home of the Salem Marine Society that I referred to last week. So, you know, I said you'd have to come find it for yourself, but, you know, here you go. If you made it this far to episode 2, I found it for you. You can also see this carriage house. You can almost picture a little horse carriage going in there. You can picture the hayloft on the top. That would have belonged to this Garden of Pingree home, which is next door. You cannot see this building in its full beauty from the back here. I will talk about it at some point because it has its own story of a very famous murder that happened in Salem, the murder of Captain White. But the house itself is one of the best examples of Samuel McIntyre architecture and wood carving, in terms of not just the fireplaces and the doorways, but also a lot of the furniture inside this house. Beautiful, beautiful building. Again, you can tour it through the Peabody Essex Museum along with the membership ticket. Check it out. So, just panning a little because it is beautiful, beautiful dusk night here on Easter Sunday. But over here, you can see this doorway, and this doorway is actually taken from the Grimshaw House somewhere around the 1700s. And that house is actually the house that's in need of repair on Charter Street. It was a house made famous by Nathaniel Hawthorne. The Peabody sisters lived in that home. Their family rented from the Grimshaws, and they actually invented kindergarten in America. And also the youngest, Sophia Peabody, the youngest sister, became the bride of Nathaniel Hawthorne. Nathaniel Hathorne originally, because he was the great-great-grandson of the hanging judge John Hathorne. They say that he changed his pen name to Hawthorne, maybe, to distance himself from that sad, sad history. So back here, tucked behind, you can see the little 10 by 10, you can see the John Ward house, you can see the Mormon place of worship, you can see the Hawthorne Hotel, you can see the Garden of Pingree carriage house, the Grimshaw doorway, and we also have the Salem Visitor Center. I'll just show you the side view of this. I'll go around and take some pictures afterwards of the front. But I remember this building as being the Salem Armory, and I believe it was the 80s when it was destroyed due to arson. But I'll tell you, this was a magnificent, big castle-like Gothic-looking structure that paid homage to the proud history in Salem of all of the different servicemen and women who served in pretty much every war that ever happened in America, all the way back to East Regiment, which is the birth of the National Guard in Salem. And back here you'll see my son Rebel, the great squirrel rabbit hunter of Salem. Good boy, Rebel. So there you go, guys. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of Tour Salem with a local. The local being me, lived in Salem just about 60 years now. Kind of nice not talking about the Witch Hysteria. Not that Witch Hysteria is not fascinating. It's what brings a lot of people to our beautiful city. But there's so much more that Salem has to offer. And it's always amazing to me, standing in one spot, how many layers and layers of history we can see. So thanks for joining me, especially the 2 people who couldn't wait. And if anyone else listened in, hey, thanks too. So see you next time. Bye. Bye.